I know exactly how many coffee cups are in this house. 4, one for each person who used to sit at this table every Sunday morning. Me, my husband, my daughter, and whoever she brought home that week. Now there's just 1 cup. Mine. And most mornings I leave it in the sink unwashed, because washing it feels like admitting something I'm not ready to admit yet. My husband Walter passed 2 years ago this past March. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We didn't even have time to fight it properly. Just enough time to say the things we should have said years earlier and hold hands through the worst of it. He was 68. I was 66. We had 31 years together, a paid-off house in Greensboro, North Carolina, a daughter named Sylvia, and what I thought was an understanding about how the rest of our lives would go. I was wrong about that last part. Walter and I had built everything together. He was an electrician who eventually started his own contracting business, and I taught 3rd grade at an elementary school for 24 years before retiring. We weren't wealthy, not by any stretch, but we were comfortable. The house was ours, free and clear, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street with a big backyard that Walter spent every weekend maintaining like it was his personal project. He loved that yard. I used to tease him about it. Now I can't walk past the rose bushes without having to take a breath. Sylvia is our only child. She's 38 now. She was always the kind of girl who knew what she wanted and moved toward it without much hesitation, which I admired when she was young and found increasingly difficult to read as she got older. She married a man named Conrad 5 years ago. He works in commercial real estate, which meant he always had opinions about property, about value, about what things were worth and what they weren't. I didn't dislike Conrad at first. He was polished, attentive in that practiced way, the kind of man who pulls out chairs and remembers to compliment the food, even when he clearly doesn't mean it. Walter was quieter about his feelings than I was, but about 2 years into their marriage, he said something to me that I've thought about almost every day since. We were sitting on the back porch after Sylvia and Conrad had driven away one Sunday evening, and Walter just looked out at the yard for a long time before he said, "I don't think he sees people. I think he sees assets." I told him he was being uncharitable. I wish I had listened instead. After Walter died, I managed. That's the honest word for it. Managed. I didn't fall apart, though. God knows I wanted to. I kept the house. I kept my routines. I paid my bills on time, kept up with my property taxes, called my sister Agnes in Raleigh every Sunday, and tried not to become one of those widows who disappear quietly into their grief and stop existing. About 8 months after the funeral, Sylvia started coming around more. I was glad for it at first. She'd come for dinner on Thursdays, and we'd sit at the kitchen table and talk the way we used to before Conrad and adult life had made her so busy. But gradually I noticed the visits had a shape to them. There was always, eventually, a conversation that turned to the house. How much it might be worth now. The neighborhood had appreciated considerably. Whether I had considered downsizing. Whether managing a 4-bedroom alone was really practical for a woman my age. I told her I was fine. The house was mine. I wasn't going anywhere. Then she brought up the power of attorney. She framed it as protection. What if something happened to me? What if I had a health event and couldn't manage my own affairs? Wouldn't it be better to have things in place? She had already spoken to a lawyer, she said. It was simple paperwork, standard, something she was doing out of love. I was a retired school teacher, not a lawyer, but I had enough sense to feel something pull tight in my chest when she said it. I told her I needed to think about it. She smiled and said, "Of course, take your time, there's no rush." But she brought it up again the next Thursday, and the one after that. I didn't sign anything. Something in me, some stubborn, quiet thing that Walter always called my better judgment, said not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I was signing. What I didn't know was that Sylvia and Conrad weren't waiting. My younger brother, Owen, had been living in Portland, Oregon, for the better part of 20 years. He was 62 to my 68, and while we'd always been close growing up, adult life had put distance between us. Not emotional distance, just geography and the busyness of separate lives. He called every few weeks. He'd flown out for Walter's funeral and stayed 4 days and been exactly the kind of presence I needed. Quiet, practical, not trying to fix anything. What I hadn't known was that Owen had spent 15 years as a real estate attorney before transitioning into estate law. He was semi-retired now, consulting on complex cases. He understood documents the way I understood 8-year-olds, completely and without being fooled. He called me on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in the kitchen drinking my single cup of coffee, looking out at the yard, when my phone rang. "I need to ask you something," he said without much preamble, "and I need you to answer me honestly." I said, "Of course. Have you signed anything recently? Any documents related to the house or your finances?" I told him no. I'd been asked to, but hadn't. There was a pause. Then he said, "Good. Now I need you to go to your filing cabinet and pull out your property deed. Right now, if you can." Something about his voice made me set down my coffee and do exactly that. The deed was where it always was, in the green hanging folder, labelled House, in Walter's handwriting. I pulled it out and read him what it said. He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Now I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm." I sat down. Owen had been contacted by an old colleague who worked in county records in Guilford County. This colleague had noticed something irregular. An inquiry had been made about the property at my address, not an official inquiry, but a preliminary one, the kind that sometimes precedes paperwork. Someone had been asking questions about the process for transferring property title when the owner has a documented cognitive impairment. I didn't have a documented cognitive impairment. I didn't have any cognitive impairment at all. But someone had apparently been laying groundwork for a claim that I did. The name on the inquiry was Conrad's. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I hung up with Owen. I looked around at the kitchen Walter and I had remodelled in 2009, the white subway tile backsplash we'd argued about for a month before agreeing on, the window over the sink that looked out at his roses, the drawer that still stuck the same way it had stuck for 15 years, because Walter always said he'd fix it and never quite got around to it. I thought about Sylvia sitting at this same table every Thursday, eating my food and asking careful questions about the power of attorney. And I thought about how long it takes to understand that someone you love is not who you thought they were. A long time, it turns out, right up until you can't avoid it anymore. Owen flew in that Friday. He didn't call ahead to announce it to anyone except me. He showed up at my door with a carry-on bag and a calm expression that I recognized from when we were children. The face he made when he was the most serious he was capable of being. He spent Saturday going through every piece of paper in my filing cabinet, every document, every statement, every piece of mail that had come in the past year. He found 3 things that concerned him. One was a letter from my bank about an inquiry into my account that I hadn't initiated. The second was a form I didn't recognize, pre-filled with my information, asking about assigning a representative payee for my Social Security benefits. The third was a business card for a physician I had never visited, tucked into a water bill envelope, with a note in Conrad's handwriting that said, "Call re-eval." Owen put everything in a folder and looked at me across the kitchen table. "Have you talked to an elder law attorney?" he asked. I hadn't even known that was a specialty. "We're going to fix that on Monday," he said. "Sylvia called Saturday evening. She said she'd heard from Conrad that my car was in the driveway and a rental car was parked out front, and she wanted to know what was going on. I told her my brother was visiting. She said that was nice, and her voice was careful the way it gets when she's thinking faster than she's talking. Then she said she and Conrad wanted to come by for dinner Sunday. Bring some food, catch up. She'd love to see Owen. I told her that sounded fine. I want to be honest here about what Sunday felt like. I had not slept much. I was sitting in my kitchen, in my house, on my street, in the neighborhood I had lived in for 26 years, and I felt like a stranger in it. That's what manipulation does when you finally see it clearly. It makes you feel crazy for having trusted, and then crazy for having doubted, and somewhere in between those two feelings there is just a profound exhaustion that goes all the way down to the bone. Owen sat with me at the kitchen table that morning and didn't say much. He made us both toast. He refilled my coffee. He didn't try to make it better with words, which was exactly right, because there were no words that would have helped. They arrived at 5. Conrad carried in grocery bags from Whole Foods, which is the kind of thing that would have charmed me a year ago. He was smiling, easy, completely himself. And that ease, I realized, was not reassurance. It was information. It told me he didn't know Owen knew. He thought he was walking into a dinner. Sylvia hugged me. She smelled like her perfume, the same one she'd worn for years. And for a second I felt the pull of just being her mother, of setting everything down and pretending none of it was happening because pretending was so much easier than this. I didn't pretend. We sat down. Owen brought out the folder. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform anything. He simply laid the documents on the table, one at a time, and explained what each one was and what it indicated. The property inquiry, the Social Security representative payee form, the business card with Conrad's handwriting. He identified them the way a professional identifies things, with precision and without drama. Conrad's face changed when the business card came out. It was subtle. If I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed it. But I was watching, and I didn't miss it. "I don't know what those are," he said. Owen looked at him for a moment. "The handwriting on this card is yours. I've seen enough documents in my career to be comfortable saying that. And the physician on this card specializes in cognitive assessments for the purpose of establishing legal incapacity. So I'd encourage you to think carefully before you continue saying you don't know what it is." Sylvia was very still. She was looking at the table. "Sylvia," I said, just her name. I didn't know what else to say. She didn't look up for a long moment. When she did, her eyes were wet, and I watched her try to decide something. I could actually see her trying to decide. And then she said very quietly, "It was just in case, Mom. We weren't going to do anything unless we had to." "Unless you had to," I repeated. "You're alone," she said. "Anything could happen. The house is just sitting here and you're—" "This is my house," I said. "Your father and I paid for it. I have lived here for 26 years. There is nothing wrong with me, and whatever you were planning, whatever just in case, was going to look like, it ends right now." Conrad pushed back from the table. "This is getting out of hand." "We were trying to help." "Stop," Owen said. His voice was very quiet and very certain. The kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud to land with full weight. "I'm going to tell you what happens next. On Monday, my sister is going to meet with an elder law attorney. She is going to establish clear documentation of her legal competency and her wishes regarding this property. She is going to make sure that every door you have been trying to open quietly is locked, permanently. And if any further attempt is made, through legal channels, through physicians, through county records, through anything, I will know about it because I know people in this field, and I will respond accordingly. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The room was quiet. Conrad understood. I could see it. They left before 6. Conrad didn't take the grocery bags. I stood at the window and watched his car pull out of my driveway, and I felt a complex of things that didn't have clean names, grief and relief and something like shame, though I'd done nothing to be ashamed of, and under all of it a cold, clear anger that I decided I was entitled to. Owen stayed until Wednesday. Monday we met with an attorney named Patricia Okafor, whose office was in downtown Greensboro. She was methodical and thorough and did not make me feel stupid for not having done this earlier. By the time we left her office, I had initiated a full review of any pending inquiries connected to my property, established a durable power of attorney with Owen as my designated agent, not Sylvia, not Conrad, and begun the process of getting a letter on file with my bank flagging any account changes for secondary review. "You're better protected than most people your age," Patricia told me. "I shouldn't have needed to be protected from my own daughter," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No, you shouldn't have. I haven't spoken to Sylvia since that Sunday. She called twice in the 2 weeks after. I let both calls go to voicemail. I'm not ready. I don't know if ready is something that comes or something you decide, but either way, I'm not there yet. What I know is that I am not willing to trade truth for peace. I tried that quietly and without meaning to for the better part of a year, took the questions about the house at face value, assumed the kindness behind the power of attorney conversation was real, told myself my unease was just grief making me suspicious. I'm done doing that. My house is mine. It's going to stay mine. The rose bushes Walter planted came back this spring, the way they do every year, without being asked, without any intervention, just because that's their nature. I've been tending them a little more carefully than I used to. It feels like the right thing to do, like keeping a promise to someone who kept all of his promises to me and deserved someone who did the same. My brother calls every week now instead of every few weeks. Last Sunday, he said he was thinking about driving out in May when the weather was better. I told him he didn't need to wait for the weather. He said he knew that. I think he just wanted to say it. This is my house. This is my life. And for the first time in 2 years, I feel like I'm living in it again. Not just surviving it, not just occupying the space Walter left behind, but actually, quietly, deliberately living. That's enough. That is exactly enough. I keep thinking about that kitchen table, the one Walter and I bought at an estate sale in 1997, hauled home in the back of a borrowed pickup truck, refinished ourselves over a long weekend with sandpaper and stain and a lot of arguing about the colour. That table has held 30 years as Sunday breakfasts and holiday meals and hard conversations. And it's the same table where I watched my daughter try to decide in real time whether to keep lying or tell the truth. She chose the truth. Late, and only when cornered. But she chose it. I've been trying to figure out what to do with that. Here's what I've come to understand about how things unfold in a life. Actions don't disappear, they accumulate. Conrad spent months laying quiet groundwork, inquiries, forms, a business card tucked into an envelope, and every one of those actions built something. Not the outcome he intended, but something. A record, a pattern that my brother Owen recognized immediately because he'd spent a career learning to read exactly that kind of pattern. Conrad's choices didn't go unnoticed. They just got noticed by the wrong person from his perspective. That's how it works. What you do in the quiet, when you think no one is paying attention, shapes what happens when the lights come on. Owen didn't save me because he was lucky or because he happened to call at the right moment. He saved me because he had spent decades building real knowledge, not the performed kind, not the kind you use to impress people at dinner, but the kind that lives in you so completely that you can deploy it calmly at a kitchen table on a Sunday evening without raising your voice once. He knew what those documents meant. He knew who to call, what to file, how to close doors that someone had been quietly trying to pry open. That knowledge was the product of years of honest, unglamorous work. It was one of the most useful things I've ever witnessed, and I think about my own part in this. I didn't sign anything. Something in me held back even when I couldn't have explained exactly why, even when Sylvia's arguments were reasonable on the surface, and I felt guilty for my suspicion. I've thought about whether that instinct was wisdom or just stubbornness, and I've decided it doesn't matter which one it was. What matters is that I held the line, not dramatically, not with confrontation, just quietly, week after week, saying not yet. That kind of endurance doesn't look like much from the outside. It doesn't feel heroic. It just feels like being tired and uncertain and doing the right thing anyway, one Thursday at a time. I'm not angry at Sylvia in a simple way. I'm something more complicated than angry. I'm sad for who she became when she decided that what I had was more important than who I was. I'm sad that she looked at her grieving mother in a house full of her father's things and saw an opportunity rather than a person. That's a moral failure, and it has consequences, not punishment handed down from anywhere, just the natural consequence of what happens when you hollow out a relationship from the inside and the other person finally sees it clearly. Walter used to say that the most important things about a person show up not in the big moments, but in the small ones, in whether they tell the truth when it costs them something, in whether they do right by people who are vulnerable, in whether they are who they say they are when no one is checking. I believe that. I've seen it proven. The rose bushes came back this spring. I've been tending them. It feels like the right thing to do with the time I have left in this house that is mine, earned, defended, kept,